Hi everybody. I think it's time for me to talk. Just to welcome you all here today to the Training Provider Forum that we're running. It's our third Training Provider Forum, I believe, but it's our first online. So work with us on this. I'm sure it'll go swimmingly. Look, I'm going to do a brief introduction. Along with the Deputy Director of Professional Standards Committee, Anna Shumilevich. We're going to be talking for approximately 40 minutes, 20 minutes each, about the subjects we're covering today. We're then going to go to, we've got a couple of sessions to follow that, one focused on a theory assessment, a standardized theory assessment, and another focused on a practical assessment, common practical assessment. That suggests the title that we have in front of us. So effective learner assessment is our subject for this Training Provider Forum. And I sort of thought long and hard about what that subject should be. And we've done some consultation on that. We've talked to some of the members of our Training Provider Coalition that I'll talk about a little bit more later to get some feedback on what they think we should talk about. And I guess, you know, the reason here is that the reason we've chosen this particular subject is, well, I guess I want to get into the nitty-gritty of this a little bit. There was feedback that sometimes, you know, we're talking about lofty intentions of the industry, the bigger picture stuff, and we're not always giving enough content that actually speaks to the training provider's situation, to their actual practice, something that can impact on the ground for them. And I think that's what I hope today's session will actually do for us. The other reason, I guess, one of the main reasons that we want to do this is because we've obviously been through quite a tough time as an industry. The impact of COVID-19, or the impacts, have been many and varied and affected us all in many ways, both employers, fitness professionals out there, and training providers. It certainly has impacted on education like never before. That education perhaps will never be quite the same. I think many of you out there will be able to identify with the fact that you've had to adjust your practice. You know, a lot of people have increasingly gone into the online situation through necessity in terms of delivery and assessment of qualifications, and you've had to adapt. Some of you had stuff in place already, but others have really had to do that from scratch. And I think many people have actually taken on board some of the advantages, some of the pros, but also perhaps some of the cons of online work. And while they have adjusted their models through the COVID period, it may be that they remain with a similar model, or an adapted model anyway, going into the future. Now, we're trying to account for that in terms of how we accredit people, but also it sort of puts more emphasis on the importance of assessment, of that final outcome, that we need to ensure that those people going through whatever delivery model it may be has those has met the necessary standard and can perform the job role, has the knowledge, has the competencies, has the practical skills, if you like. So that's why we've chosen this subject. And I'm still on my first slide, so I need to move on. And I haven't even introduced myself. Julian Berryman, I'm the Director of the Professional Standards Committee. I will know most of you out there, I'm sure, but just to introduce myself. So if we move on, so sometimes you can't see the road ahead, but as you keep going, it gets clearer. Stay the course as the fog of life dissipates. So this is what what today I believe is very much about, is staying the course, is staying focused on our main goal, which is one of professionalizing the industry, of standardizing what we do, so we can ensure that every fitness professional out there has met the required level, is actually qualified, and we'll talk about that word quite a bit today, qualified to do the job that they're asked to do when they enter into the fitness industry. So just to talk about some of the things that we've done already. So we've been working hard, myself and the verification team, and and Charlie Hayward, particularly my accreditations manager, in terms of increasing or continue to develop the accreditation process. So you'll know that we have introduced learning hours, guided learning hours, that are now a requirement of accreditation. They've been introduced into the accreditation process. We have introduced a more robust re-accreditation process. And I think both of those things in some instances have been a bit of a shock in some instances to training providers, some of the requirements that we put you through, but that is in our efforts to improve and continue to develop our accreditation processes. We have also recently, in the interests of talking to you and consulting on that development of the accreditation process, we have formed something called the Training Provider Coalition. So I would say to all of you training providers listening in that if you want to be a part of that and you're not already, then please contact us, and I'm sure we can make that happen. We have already consulted online with the Training Provider Coalition, but we're actually going to have a meeting of that group on the 4th of May. So if you want to get involved, please do so. But we can also see that in upgrading our accreditation processes, that's what today is about, consultations on standardizing these assessments. How do we move to a better place with our assessments? There is a feeling that those assessments can be quite varied in the way they're applied and the robustness of those assessments, both in terms of theory and perhaps most importantly in terms of that practical assessment of GYM skills. So we're very keen to focus on those assessments and get your feedback. It's very much a case of this isn't us trying to impose this on you. What we want to do is consult with you and involve you in that process of improving those assessments. I just wanted to thank you all for your support. It's not the main subject for today, but just to say that, you know, we continue to maintain our EREPS numbers. They have grown significantly over the years, and we've maintained those numbers through this COVID period. And we have members from across Europe and increasingly from around the world as well. So obviously a lot of that is coming from you guys as training providers, supporting us, putting your graduates through onto EREPS. So we very much appreciate that support. So I just wanted to, before I talk more about the assessment piece, just to focus a little bit on some of the things that we've done around EREPS. And one of those things is a video. So bear with me, I can't resist playing this one. So please, I will now try and do that. I'll play it in the small screen because the bigger screen I think breaks up a little bit, but let's see.
We are EREPS, the European Register of Exercise Professionals, a truly independent register of trainers, instructors and teachers working in the fitness and physical activity sector, with members across 38 European countries and international members from around the world. EREPS is an international register founded on the educational standards EuropeActive, set over the last 20 years in consultation with experts from across the European fitness industry.
Joining the EREPS community has tripled the number of clients I work with.
It is through your website I find and attend courses.
We work with the best ambassadors for our sector to ensure fit-for-purpose skills. A membership service which puts the individual at the centre of everything we do. Join now at www.ereps.eu.
Okay, guys, just wanted to show you that. I think I've just popped on, so we'll go back. Just wanted to show you that. There is a longer version, that's only a minute, but there is a 2-minute version. I wanted to show you that because I'm not sure if everybody has seen that. We send stuff out, and it's a plea to you guys really to maybe try and keep in tune with that. You know, I would hope that every one of you would have that video on your website and would actively promote that. We've pushed it out to EREPS members so they can promote themselves. And I guess this, for me, is where we show the real value of EREPS. in terms of, those individual members, that if they promote that value, if they show the association with EREPS and the quality of what we do, the standards on which we work, that will draw clients to them. And that is the real value of EREPS. So please try and have the video on your websites, push it out to your graduates. We have an EREPS ambassador program. I won't click on that, but we've introduced that this year. So these are all efforts to increase the value of EREPS. We have some leading figures from the industry, from the fitness and physical activity industry, who are now working with us as EREPS ambassadors. A lot of social media type interaction, and that we will be developing that area. We have an EREPS resource library, so podcasts, etc., and we will be developing that further. You can see there at the bottom EREPS webinars. We did those last year, and we're going to pick them up again in a slightly more professional way. We had to really improvise quite a lot to get those EREPS webinars out last year. We are revising the EREPS Code of Ethical Practice to take into account the COVID situation and how instructors should respond to that. That Code of Ethical Practice is now being put through the DEI group, Diversity, Equity and Inclusion group. So it has reference to the importance of equality, diversity, etc. We're working hard for greater interaction on social media. We're now, Charlie will be pleased for me to announce, we're up to 4,000 Instagram followers, which is pretty good for a register, and we'll continue to develop that. You should also know that we have the EREPS Media Pack. You should be pushing this out to your members. We're certainly pushing it to our EREPS members, but this is something where the individual can promote themselves using our media kit, and that's been translated into a number of languages. So again, please work with these things. If you don't know anything about the video or the media pack, then please contact us and we'll tell you all about it. Standards, well, what have we done recently on standards? You'll have seen recently that we introduced the online provision of fitness services, lifelong learning qualification, as more and more instructors have put themselves in that online situation, and that's something that we need to standardize, something we need to work with. We have had training providers accredit themselves against those standards. We need more. We want more of you to come forward and accredit any courses that you have against that lifelong learning qualification. This has been somewhat delayed by COVID, but we are continuing to work towards the introduction of a master trainer category on EREPS. Perhaps that wasn't particularly appropriate through the COVID period, but it will be resurfacing in the next month or so, and we will be introducing that master trainer category for EREPS. So that's about somebody who's gained additional experience, lifelong learning, etc., to call themselves a master trainer. We will be facilitating the pathway to lifelong learning qualifications for working with at-risk groups. So we already have obesity and diabetes, you'll know that, but we don't have enough training providers taking on those additional standards, those additional qualifications. So we want to look at how we can make that more accessible for people. And that's about making them into lifelong learning qualifications so they're easier to deliver for you guys. So that might be pregnancy, it might be in terms of something relating to ill health, so cancer care, low back pain. We'll be looking at all of these areas. Okay. You should know as well that we've been working to update the standards somewhat. That's our main course standards in terms of fitness instruction, personal training, exercise for health specialists. And we have added some new areas, some new standards, some new learning outcomes, if you like, in the areas of the immune system, online, and also in terms of outdoor and home training. All things that have really come to the fore through the COVID period. You can see that I won't go through each of those individually, but you can see those points there, those areas that you would need to cover. We will be releasing those shortly after this event so that you'll be able to update your courses accordingly. Okay, so something we want to introduce today, which is a big thing for us, a big shift, is that we are looking, or we have translated our standards into qualifications. Anna is going to talk about that in detail in a moment, so I won't dwell on it too much, but just to give you an insight into this. So since 2002, EuropeActive has been developing what we've always referred to as the Fitness Sector Qualification Framework, the SQF. And you can see all the occupational roles that we have there within the SQF. And you'll be familiar with most of them, I hope. Now, the current SQF actually represents a standards framework of knowledge, skills, autonomy and responsibility. So they are actually standards. So it's a little bit awkward, it doesn't quite fit, that we have always referred to it as a sector qualifications framework. Now we've embarked on a number of projects over the last few years, last 5 or 6 years, the Eqf project and the Blueprint projects. And as a result of the work on those projects, we have now developed those standards into learning outcomes-based qualifications. And we're going to talk about the reasons why. So we can see there that qualifications are seen as an instrument of choice for allowing cross-national, cross-institutional coordination of professional content, despite the absence of licensing or mandatory training. So qualifications as a format are accepted at a European level to promote that mobility of employment, that harmonization of delivery across a particular sector, and are particularly useful in the situation where there are no mandatory regulations controlling that sector. Our sector is about self-regulation as we stand. Okay, so what have we done within those qualifications? Well, we now have definitive expressions of learning outcomes. It was never really that clear in terms of learning outcome statements within our standards. There was a reference to learning outcomes, but we've more clearly expressed those perhaps. So statements of what an individual should know, understand, and be able to do at the end of the learning process. This is what learning outcomes are all about. They're central to the structure of qualifications. And they will determine the nature of the actual delivery, how you deliver your courses, but also assessment practices, which is clearly what we're here today to talk about. And what they promote is that a more output-focused approach. So by that, I mean that if we can effectively assess the outcomes, if we can assess that person against those learning outcomes and ensure that they can meet those learning outcomes, we can be confident that they are qualified to do that particular role. And therefore, there's less emphasis on the input side, how much delivery time, et cetera, how that's delivered and where. I guess in a way, we're trying to tick both of those boxes in that, we've introduced our guided learning hours, but also now we're looking more towards that output focus. We also have, within the learning outcomes, within a qualification, we also clearly identify assessment criteria, and we'll see those in a minute. These demonstrate the achievement of the learning outcomes and what you guys should be using to base your assessments on. They provide a clear indication of the nature of assessment. So here you have an example, I think it's from the PT qualification, of how things are going to be structured within these new qualifications. And you can see there we have a learning outcome to understand. So that's understand functional kinesiology and biomechanics. That's what the learner should be able to do. That's how they should be different at the end of the learning process. And then we have a series of assessment criteria, which use action verbs that fit with that learning outcome. So, and are appropriate to that learning outcome. So if we're going to understand, we need to be able to describe, we need to be able to explain. And that would suggest, would it not, in terms of the assessment, that is likely to be some form of theory-based assessment. We may have a learning outcome that's focused on the ability to do something, be able to deliver safe and effective exercise. And in that sense, we can see now that the assessment criteria, those action verbs, are adjusted to fit with that learning outcome. So now we need to be able to recognize, to use different equipment and teaching strategies. That would suggest, would it not, a more practically based assessment. So application of a learning outcomes approach is flawed if the assessment is not robust and consistent across training institutions. So that's the key, isn't it? That's what we're trying to do here. How can we make those assessments that you guys currently do more consistent? That's not saying that they're not of a very good quality now, but they will be variable, and we need to have that minimum standard. We've looked at hours, we've looked at reaccreditation. Next stage is to look more closely at the assessment side. It's an evolution, not a revolution. So the qualification format I've talked about is going to be introduced as part of the accreditation process from June 2021. So you will be able to refer to that. I think that will make your life a lot easier because it will be a lot clearer what you need to actually do. We're going to talk about a practical assessment today, but it's a consultation. We're looking to get feedback. We're hoping that we can issue guidance by June, and that by the beginning of January 2022, that can become a formal part of the accreditation process. We're talking about the ongoing trialing and refining of theory assessment today as well. Now, that might be a slightly longer process. Again, we need your feedback on how we can actually take that forward. How might we better standardize the theory side? Okay, so benefits of introduction of qualifications, ease of referencing to common qualifications. So it will be much easier for you to see, to relate, to map, if you like, your syllabus, your courses to those qualifications. More prescriptive assessments, ensuring a common standard. That's not to say that there isn't going to be flexibility there, but there is going to be more prescription, more clarity from us in terms of what those assessments should look like. No significant changes needed in terms of content. Well, with the exception of those content updates I talked about, the immune system, outdoor, etc., you should look at those. But we have not added content here. We've simply reformatted our standards into that qualification format. So it shouldn't be overly onerous in that regard. Okay, before Anna comes on and talks more about qualifications, and I realize I'm just going over time. So just to let you know that we're focusing on learner assessment today, but it's not that we're ignoring the bigger issues, because I know there are lots of huge issues out there, and they have been talked about a lot on various webinars, etc. So, yeah, and clearly as a sector, we need to reach out to the health sector, and we need to think about how we do that. EuropeActive is very much addressing that. The EHFF, the Great Transformation, you might have seen announced this morning that CIBEC, FIBO, and EuropeActive are now combining their efforts at FIBO in November in Cologne. We also have our ISM in Cologne, only one day this year, but we'll be looking at very much at that relationship between our sector and the health sector. And we'll be looking also at the digital side of things as well. So these things are to come. We need to consider these in developing any future standards and qualifications. We're planning a medical fitness summit in 2022, where we very much involve the health sector. It's important that we don't just design standards and qualifications based on what we think the health sector needs, but also based on the feedback we get from the health sector. We need to be talking to the health sector. What are they looking for from us? More employer engagement. I won't talk in detail about this, but alignment with the SEN standards for facilities and people. So there are now some formal standards out there that have been developed by SEN, the European standard setting body, that will allow a club certification scheme based on the SEN standards. Those SEN standards relate to facilities, so what a facility should be doing and look like, but also to people, that, you know, what should be the qualifications of the people in those facilities. And those SEN standards have actually been based on our own EuropeActive standards, on the sector qualification framework. We'll be looking to engage more with higher education, Think Active, we are our research body, and the Scientific Advisory Council, which is a grouping of academics, so that we can continue to evidence-base our standards. Just final plea, I'm in the next week or so, we're putting out a survey of fitness professionals and employers of their current situation as we return to work from COVID-19, hopefully. Please look out for that. And if you can encourage people, your previous graduates and others to take part in that survey, that would be much appreciated. We need as big a response from that as possible. I will stop talking now because I think I'm about 5 minutes over time. So I need to bring in Anna. Are you there, Anna?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you very much, Julian. Yes. So
can I hand over to you?
Yeah. So it's my turn to share the screen. All right. So let's wait for my presentation. Okay. So hello everyone. Good afternoon. I'm very happy to be a part of this important event and that I have the opportunity to share some thoughts about the learners assessment. And I think it's really important topic. In my presentation, I will focus on translating standards into qualifications, and maybe some of you have questions here. Why do we need this change? Is it really necessary to change something, what was good enough? And of course, I can reply very quickly, yes, that we really need this change if we want to follow the recommendations of the Council of the European Union. If we read the definition of qualification, the definition is really clear. Assessment and validation are the elements that sometimes were not covered in our previous documents. So therefore, we try to be more focused on them. So the assessment strategy, the main topic for today. And also that the qualifications determine that an individual has achieved learning outcomes to given standards. So we will use the standards which were developed in the past years, but we are going to add some new elements to the documents. So the documents look very similar, but new elements will be added, like assessment criteria and methods, Eqf level assignment, but based on a transparent procedure. And here we will use Eqf project outcomes, and also the educational credit assignment. We will use ECVET and ECTS credits, and here we will use the outcomes of Blueprint project. So Julian has already presented the new structure of qualification, and we have learning outcomes, we have assessment criteria, and owing to that, we really know how to check if someone has achieved the indicated knowledge, skills, and competences. And also, which is really important, are the assessment methods. So far, we have indicated very generally that some learning outcomes units should be checked using theoretical or practical evaluations. We recommend to use worksheets, theoretical case studies, and so on. And it will be task for you for today, for the session with Charlie, to help us a little bit to specify how the assessment strategy should look like. And I'm waiting for the session. It is really important to have this strategy, because even the best document, even the best educational standard ever will not guarantee that the learner will achieve everything which is needed for the market. And I can give you an example from Poland. You can see in the slide some results from a study which was conducted 20 years ago by Professor Siwiński. And this study was conducted in sports for all instructors, including fitness, group fitness, and tennis instructors. So a big part of these responders were people from our sector. And this survey was done when the profession of physical recreation instructor in Poland was fully regulated. So we had everything described in details, the amount of hours that we were supposed to spend on teaching anatomy, physiology, and also the amount of hours that we should spend on teaching practical skills. And also we had some recommendation for the competencies of teaching staff. Everything was described in details. And as you can see here, it was not the key to the success. And around 70% of the instructors had average level of professional preparation. So it was not an effective strategy. And I would like to share with you a funny story, maybe funny now, but it wasn't 20 years ago. I was a coordinator of a training course for group fitness instructors. And after a few weeks of working with a group of learners, they passed the final exam, and I had to complete a lot of papers. I sent a package of documents according to the standards, which was set by the Ministry of Sport. And after a few days, I got a criticizing letter from the ministry, and I was asked to reply why I spent 1 learning hour more on practical exercises and why I used 1 learning hour instead of use it for seminar. So it was a really ridiculous situation. I had to write 3 pages of letter explaining the situation, but no one asked me what was the final outcome of the education, if the learners passed the exam or not, if they were ready to go to the market and work as group fitness instructors. So I'm very happy that the situation cannot happen again, because our system has changed completely. But this is an example that recording teaching hours should not be the most important activity in the educational process. Therefore, in our qualifications in EuropeActive, we are trying to give you only the general recommendation of the minimum number of recommended learning hours, and we are trying to be more focused on the output of education. And there are many benefits of such an approach. When we think about the final product of the education, we think about professional roles. Okay, so when we think about professional roles, we are less concentrated on the details which are at the beginning. So we don't think so much on the educational input. And from my perspective, I know that experts who describe qualifications, who describe the educational programs, at the beginning, they try to put everything which is related to professional knowledge. And we have a lot of achievements, scientific achievements in terms of exercise science. And this is very good, but not everything which is related to exercise science is essential, is necessary for every exercise professionals. And this is just an example. Irisin is an myokine that plays an important role in glucose and lipids homeostasis. And this is just the example how quickly we can go from physiology to biochemistry and then even to the molecular level. And when I ask you, is this knowledge necessary for a personal trainer? Some of you could reply, yes, because personal trainer has to lead to better lipid profile and to better glucose metabolism. So yes, this knowledge is important for personal trainer. But when we start to look from the perspective of the final product, when we look at the personal trainer in the natural environment, we start to think about the general competencies, and then the knowledge on irising seems to be not so important in comparison to such skills like proper greeting of the client, like proper relationship, and to arousing some emotions, positive emotions towards exercise program. And this is good approach, because when we analyze everything after starting from the end, we can delete a lot of sentences. I cannot say these are not important, but for sure they are not of the first priority in terms of the occupational roles. And in the process of assessing learning outcomes, tasks should be authentic and set in a realistic context. This is a very important statement. If we are talking about the assessment strategy, we should put someone in the environment which is typical for future work. And it must be the whole process of the work, not some stages, not some parts of it. And when we have personal trainer, we need to be focused on all elements of lifestyle change, on exercise program implementation, not only on the on one exercise session. I know there's a tendency that we are focused on the skills, how to implement a single exercise session. And I used to be in a few panels for assessors of personal trainers, and it was a clear tendency to be focused on assessing just a single exercise session, a single training. But we must remember that there are also long-term goals, and that there are many other aspects of the implementation of exercise programs, not only in the gym, but also around the client, around the client life. And it must be also assessed somehow. I know it's difficult, but I hope that you have the solution for it, that you have some experience, and that we can gather everything and to have a great assessment strategy to be sure that our personal trainers are really prepared for their jobs. In the process of assessing learning outcomes, we should stick to defined professional roles. Already in our educational standards, previously, we have this list, and we indicated the tasks that personal trainers are not endorsed to do. Sometimes we expect too much from personal trainers. We expect them to be nutritionists, psychologists, physiologists, and maybe exercise scientists. But of course, it's not possible. We should know the limits, and starting from the end, from analyzing the occupational roles, we can avoid such mistakes. We have a good quality evidence today that in some aspects personal trainers fail, and this is an example that personal trainers are not ready to give proper nutrition advice, and that's fine because it's not their role. They should be ready to cooperate with nutritionists, but they don't have to give proper nutrition advice. But we have to check if they are ready to cooperate with nutritionists, and it will be some kind of challenge how to do that. And this is a good time to discuss the differences between the Eqf levels. As I said at the beginning, qualifications have the Eqf level, and of course for each qualification the level will be assigned individually. So we have some qualifications on level 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And it doesn't mean that someone who has the qualification on level 3 is worse than someone on level 5. The difference is that the complexity of the occupational roles of the professional tasks is different. But all these roles are necessary for the market. And I must underline that the level of EQF is not the expression of the numbers of hours spent on learning, and doesn't express the length of time spent on education. It's just the expression of the complexity of the advancement of tasks, of learning outcomes. We have developed a procedure to assign the EQF level to qualifications. And if you would like to know the whole procedure, we have everything described in the final report of the project. I'm going to show you some examples. So don't worry, I'm not expecting you are reading all the details of the slide, but I would like to give you just the general overview that this is a complex procedure. We take every single learning outcome, which is in the qualification, and then we compare it to the specific descriptor in the EQF table, and then we also compare it to the descriptor in the sector qualification framework in active leisure, which was a product in Eqf project. And we are trying to find the best descriptor which fits the best to the learning outcome. And then we summarize the results. When we are not sure which level is the best for a particular learning outcome, we use again the responsibility and autonomy descriptors from the general EQF table. So the process is complex, it's transparent, and this is an important information for you that we are not guessing which is the level of qualification. Probably some of you know that the personal trainer qualification is on level 4. Why we are doing so? Again, we want to meet the recommendation of the European Union. Qualifications are more transparent and comparable when they are presented in documents that include a reference to the applicable EQF level. And we as a sector want to meet this recommendation of the European Union Council. We also want to meet another recommendations, because we want our education be transparent also for other sectors, not only for us. And we want to use credit points, educational points. For example, from the recommendation from 2009 about ECVET credits. And in Blueprint project, we have output 6, about application of ECVET and ECTS to new qualifications. And again, if you would like to know the whole procedure for the credit assignments, we have everything described in the final report of this project. And important information is that we use both systems. ECVET, which is typical for vocational education and training, and also we use ECTS, the European Credit Transfer and Accumulation System, typical for higher education. And owing to that, we are able to put some credits to our qualifications in fitness sector. So we have ECVET, we have ECTS, and this is an example for personal trainer qualification. Is it important or not? Of course, when we are talking about a single qualification, it's not so essential, but when we are talking about the perspective of few years of education, of a few years of being in the market, it is useful for the learner, because owing to the credits, someone can accumulate and then transfer all these achievements, educational achievements, and owing to that, someone can apply for a recognition and someone can go to higher qualification like master personal trainer or exercise specialist. So it can be someone on the same EQF level or even on higher EQF level. And all these initiatives, all these changes, modifications are done for the goal to have flexible education, to have attractive education, and first of all, to have credible professionals. So starting from the end, we want to have people in the market who are properly prepared for their jobs. And this is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much. If you have any comments, please share with us. I hope to have chance to respond to these questions.
Lovely, thank you, Anna. And of course, I've just realised that as ever, I forgot to say to everybody that we can post questions, of course, in the Q&A box there. So please feel free to do that at any point, and we will endeavour to answer those questions. So yes, thank you, Anna. That's great. Great to have that insight and that the credibility that your work brings to our qualifications, as we can refer to them now. I think training providers, I'm sure you do. Training providers will find those qualifications maybe more accessible. Do you believe that?
Yes, I hope so. Yes. Yes, it's our main goal to change it a little bit, because usually the standards were described in a very broad way. So we have a lot of learning outcomes which are, sometimes not useful, because the detailed knowledge is okay for someone to have it, but if it's useful to play the roles in the market, so we don't know. So it's better to start from the end and check if maybe some aspects of the learning outcomes can be deleted, and owing to that, the education will be quicker, cheaper, and easier for the training provider to prepare the assessment strategy and the whole process of education.
Yes, no, and yeah, absolutely. I think it will be easier. I think that the providers will find it a lot easier to work with those with that new format of qualification, which we will release in the next few weeks. So I think that's good. It was interesting also, Anna, to hear you talk about, that the whole process, and a realistic environment and the whole process. That at the moment, I guess we're focusing in on the theory assessment. And Ben's going to talk about that in just a moment, but we are focusing in on a practical assessment, but I'm listening to you there and I'm thinking, okay, but we're focusing very much, I guess, at this time on that single session of practical exercise. Charlie will talk about it more, but we need to address that whole process. And of course, one of the requirements is of the personal trainer, I believe, it is actually a case study, right?
Right. Yes, and of course the single session is important as well, because it's one of of the aspects of the job of personal trainer, of course. Yes, but we must also think about the long time perspective, about the lifestyle change, and about also the results of exercise program, because usually people start to cooperate with personal trainer having some long-term goals like losing weight or better health outcomes and so on. So it's also important to check it if personal trainer is ready to do this job, and also the cooperation with some exercise professionals and also with other professionals, health professionals, if they are ready to communicate or not. So some of these aspects sometimes are not covered in the assessment strategy. I know that this is the future, but we have to have this in our minds for the future.
Exactly the future, I guess. That we're looking at theory, we're looking at that practical session, but we can also look at the case study and issuing guidance around that, and that's what we should look to develop, and that's what we should be talking in these sort of forums about. And also, I'm thinking the training provider coalition that we have, I think, like I put up earlier, at 33 strong. So we want to work with training providers to come up with things that work for them, and that they can introduce from an operational perspective and are not overly onerous on them from a cost perspective as well, I guess.
Yes, I think it's very important to find a cheap and easy solution to check everything. I know
Yes.
this is always problem for training providers. We don't want to give them too complicated solutions, which will be too expensive and also time consuming, demanding for both the training provider and also for the learners. So we want quick solutions, easy, cheap.
Yes.
And I
Well,
hope
yeah.
to find it in
Sorry.
the discussion with Charles.
Yes. I'll bring in Ben in just a moment. But one last thing that you said, the level doesn't necessarily express the length of time that is, required. Learning hours, I believe, are important. You've got to have some, some control of that, and that's what we've endeavored to do with our learning hours. But the level isn't about, well, we go to level 5, so now we've got to have twice as many hours, which is interesting, isn't it, Anna, from the perspective of what we're trying to do around those maybe level 5 focused areas, those at-risk groups, that we want to make those more accessible to teach for training providers. Can you say something on that quickly? Because I know that's where we're going, right? That we want to produce those lifelong learning qualifications, let's say for cancer care, but we want it to be teachable and accessible for training providers.
Yes, I think that this change is very, very important, because we have a few standards that are not used, because the training provider cannot afford to have 1 year course. And we need something which can be implemented during 1 weekend or 2 weekends, maybe 3, but not more, because people don't want to invest too much time and too much money on such education. And we know that when we take out only the essential competencies, not everything which is related to the topic, but just the essentials, so it can be done much more easy, and it will be done effectively, which is, I think, very important, that we will have effective professionals, but not but we don't have to pay a fortune for this. Okay.
No, absolutely. And again, it's interesting actually that those higher level qualifications, when you're starting to talk about working with those at-risk groups, I know in my experience as a training provider, sometimes we had to simulate situations where we were sort of pretending to work with somebody who might have a particular condition, or maybe a pregnant woman, or whatever. And which isn't actually that realistic. So, again, in terms of assessment, maybe a case study situation is more appropriate in that situation. And in terms of delivery for those higher level qualifications, you could see that a lot of that actually could be potentially delivered online with some weekend attendance. And therefore, we come up with a delivery and assessment model which is really workable for training providers. And I just want the people out there to know that that's where we're going with this, because we need more training providers delivering in these areas. But we want to work with you to make that achievable.
Exactly.
Right, Anna?
Yes, thank you. Yes.
Charlie has something to say. Sorry, I'm ignoring it.
No, it's fine. I had the first question of the day. So Olivia from Physical Coaching Academy has come in, and obviously, and please, Olivia, I apologise if I get this wrong in the understanding of this. Do actual accredited personal trainers and instructors, will they have to go through the new assessment protocols for their reaccreditation? So I'm not sure if this is a twofold question, Olivia. So I'm going to try and, I think, please interrupt me if I'm wrong, Julian, but we'll do both sides of it. If you're thinking of accredited training providers and these new protocols that we're discussing today in the theory session with Ben in a moment, and myself and some of the panelists this afternoon regarding practical, anything that we put in at the moment is in consultation, and it will be put in a transitional period. So nobody would be expected to go back and redo. It would be something that we bring in gradually, so not to disadvantage anybody. And in terms of if you meant people on the EREPS register already, we wouldn't ask people that are on the EREPS register, for example, at personal training level, to go back and do an assessment that we're proposing today. Is that okay, Julian?
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely fine. Yeah. Okay. Yes. Hi, Olivia. I think we was Van Hughes or something along those lines. I think. But anyway, Yes, we're not going to introduce this overnight. We're gonna put stuff out there today. We're then going to come back to you guys. Like I said, Training Provider Coalition will be a good talking place with this stuff. And then we will look to introduce that over a period of time. I think I put in the slide earlier that practical assessment, for example, that, while we will start to talk to training providers about it, we wouldn't expect it to be introduced until, I think, January next year, Charlie, was what we were talking about.
Right.
So yeah, it has to be workable, achievable.
One more question.
Yep.
Dilip's come in and also said,
Dilip.
Yeah, so our friend from India. Hi.
Yes, hi, Dilip.
This is a great initiative. Is the proposed assessment system compatible with requirements of SIMSPA, IC reps, UAE reps, for example? Dilip's also putting there about focus awards and active IQ, but of course in the UK,
God, we're really going to town there, Dilip. Yeah.
Yeah,
okay.
But in the UK, for those of you that don't understand, they have a different system that works to what the rest of Europe, in that SIMSPA is the register that oversees the awarding organisation. So really, we're looking at, would it be compatible with SIMSPA UAE reps, for example?
Yeah, very much. I don't believe there's any conflict there at all. What we're trying to do is, we're trying to elevate the guidance that we give, enable training providers to deliver higher, that's the wrong word, high level, to work with us to develop their assessments. That is only a good thing. I guess in some ways we perform two roles here, don't we, a little bit? We develop the qualifications, the standards, but also now, we get to input in terms of learning hours, we get to input in terms of assessment. It doesn't quite work like that in every country, the UK being an example where, you've got SIMSPA writing standards, but then you've got Active IQ, which is the awarding organization, applying hours and applying assessment practices, etc. So I guess we're in many ways we're able to dip into both of those areas, which I guess is an advantage. So Dilip, I hope that answers your question, but we are well recognized by all of those guys that you've mentioned. Mutual recognition exists between us and SIMSPA. I talked to Reps UAE, I think I heard mentioned there, Catherine at Reps UAE, and we're well aligned. So I think, it can only enhance that mutual recognition. Okay, Ben has waited very patiently. There he is. Thank you, Anna. Hi, Ben.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. That was excellent. Enjoyed that. I guess, guys, just before I talk to Ben, what I said at the beginning, the nitty gritty. So we are getting into the nitty gritty. This is, I guess, a little bit heavy stuff, but it's not heavy stuff if you've got a training provider background and you're really into this stuff. I guess, it's important to the courses that we design and we assess. Okay, so to introduce Ben, we're going to go straight into this session, and then we'll have a short break after that before coming back for the last session with Charlie. But Ben is going to talk about theory assessment. I involved Ben in this because I know of Ben's qualities and his experience in terms of working in an online environment, his background in terms of training, working with training providers, designing courses, writing standards, working for an awarding organization as well, Ben, in the UK, I believe Active IQ, who's just been mentioned. So
yes, indeed.
lots of connections. Ben currently works for one of our accredited training providers, Keelia Academy, in Iceland.
Mm-hmm.
What is your job title these days, Ben? Sorry, I should know that, of course.
I'm the program coordinator for our online division.
Okay, all right, fine. So Ben basically worked with us as part of the Blueprint project, where we looked at designing a theory assessment. Okay, so this, and again, I want to mention straight away, this isn't, we're not imposing a new theory assessment on you anytime soon, but we're just starting conversations around that to see how we can best work in this area of theory assessment. So, Ben, can I hand over to you, mate?
Certainly can. It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to be with so many wonderful training providers all around Europe. So thank you for joining us. Is that screen visible okay, Julian?
Yeah, it's good, Ben. That's good.
Okay. Let's bring the slideshow up. Lovely. Do you still see the video in the corner, or is it just the screen you see?
I see the screen and you, Ben.
All right, good. Okay, so my involvement in this project began sort of last year, and Julian invited me to play a part in creating an online common assessment strategy. Now, I guess that is kind of based on my experience in developing online courses and in online assessment strategy, and that I've been involved in that world for quite some time, probably over a decade or longer in developing online course and assessment strategy. So even though many of us, perhaps who are on the call today, may have got more involved in online education as a result of the COVID pandemic, and perhaps have had to move and change and adjust very quickly in order to ensure their courses meet those required standards, I just wanted to reassure people as we begin this thought process for a common assessment strategy that this is not a new area for me. I've been involved in the online world of education for a very long time. Now, to start with, what I would like to do is just briefly look at the analysis process. So how did I analyze the assessment requirements? And then how we decided to set up and create a potential online assessment strategy that might be fit for purpose across all of Europe or other English-speaking nations. So I'm sure we're all very familiar with these slides, I suppose, in terms of content. This is the Level 3 Fitness Instructor Core Knowledge Standards. And those standards have 8 sections and have 39 standards within them. And across those 39 standards, we have 187 assessment criteria. Now, even though we're talking here about a Level 4 personal trainer common assessment strategy, because those standards still refer to content that is contained within the Level 3, it was important that that was also considered, because they are precursor knowledge to being able to work through an appropriate Level 4 strategy as well. Now, clearly, when we're trying to create a common assessment strategy, we can't really create an assessment that has 187 questions that someone would have to work through just for Level 3, never mind what we would have to do at Level 4. So the key I want us to bring out here is to focus on the number of standards. So here we have 39 standards in Level 3. As we skip forward now to Level 4, there's actually much fewer standards, but those standards contain many more assessment criteria per standard. So there's actually 217 total assessment criteria. So if we bring all that together, that gives us, between the Level 3 and the Level 4, we get a total of 404 assessment criteria. Now, to create a strategy that is effective, it really isn't realistic to expect us to be able to assess somebody theoretically across 404 assessment criteria. That would be one heck of an assessment that would take a huge amount of time and be overwhelming for any potential learner. So initially what I decided to do was to look at the number of standards per assessment criteria. And you can see I've got that figure there on the right-hand side for fitness instructor. There's an average of 4.8 assessment criteria per standard. Whereas for personal trainer, there's much more. There's an average of 12.8 assessment criteria per standard. Now, nicely, if we look at the number of total standards, there's 56 standards. So perhaps that number of questions would be a little bit more appropriate to what could be considered as an online assessment. 56 questions in an assessment would be much more realistic rather than thinking about, 404. So let's just kind of lay out the goals and what really was the intention. So the first goal was we wanted to create a 50-question online assessment. And in terms of this assessment, it needs to be a Level 4 assessment because it has to be appropriate for personal trainer. And so therefore, the number of fitness instructor questions needs to be less than half. Now, in discussion with Julian, we decided that a 1/3 to 2/3 balance in the questions would probably be about the right mix so that we're assessing enough of the Level 3 standards to make it valuable, but that there's clearly a majority of standards that we're assessing in relation to Level 4 PT. And so that was goal A, a 50-question online assessment with that mix of standards. So that results in 17 Level 3 fitness instructor questions and 34 Level 4 PT questions when we work on that 1/3 to 2/3 balance. We also need to consider that students might take an assessment and not pass. And so there has to be the opportunity for them to go away and study and then come back and be reassessed. And so we discussed the need for potentially up to 3 assessment opportunities. Now, for anyone who's done typical face-to-face assessment where you have to produce an actual hard copy paper, usually you would be thinking there of having 3 very different and fixed assessments. And so the concept of having 150 questions is quite common, 50 questions per assessment, and they're all quite different with little crossover between them. With the world of online assessment, that's actually not so vital and so necessary, because online tools allow us to create a question bank, and that question bank can potentially select questions at random. So students taking an online assessment can potentially have a very different assessment almost every time, as long as you have more than 50 questions. So we're not so rigidly stuck to this concept of having 3 distinct papers of 50 questions each. The second goal, which I think is also important, was to create a broad enough question bank that was large enough, firstly, to accommodate the first goal. And ideally, we should have about 3 questions per standard. So as I identified, there's 56 standards. If we had 3 questions per standard, then we'd be looking at approximately 168 questions built into a question bank. This goal, whilst idealistic, and it kind of meets the mathematical formula, the reality is it needs to be adjusted and reflect the weighting of standards and assessment criteria within each standard. For example, in the personal trainer qualification, one of the standards, just one standard, has about 20 assessment criteria. So that carries more than the 1 to 12.8 average that we talked about. Therefore, should that question with more assessment criteria not have a greater weighting? We could also say the same with fitness instructor. There's the exercise physiology standard that has a huge number. I think it's 39 criteria. So some standards carry more assessment criteria than others. And so whilst the idealistic target would be for 168 questions, the reality is we need to adjust and adapt how many questions were selected from each subject area based on the predominance of assessment criteria within each individual standard. I hope that makes some sense. So what was the actual outcome? Well, the actual outcome was that the total number of assessment questions within the question bank that I've created and developed is actually 159. So it's a little short of that 168 goal, but it seemed unnecessary as we developed the questions to actually reach that 168 without throwing out that balance of assessment criteria. So we have 53 questions, which is exactly 1/3 of the total, mapped against the level 3 fitness instructor standards. And there's currently 106 questions mapped against the level 4 PT standards. So we've kept the ratio that we were after, just haven't really pushed hard to reach that 168 optimal. There's 50 questions per assessment. So we created and developed an assessment online, and those 50 question assessments are selected against the modality and standards like we talked about before. So we've kept that 1/3 and 2/3 ratio. 17 of the questions are randomly selected from the level 3 standards, and 34 of the questions are randomly selected from the level 4 PT question bank. And so what that means is there's actually a wide variety of options that the question bank can serve up, I think is the right word I'm looking for. There's a wide variety of questions that the test can serve up to a student when they log in and click to take the assessment. So even though there's only 17 of those fitness instructor questions that are going to be shown to the student, there's clearly plenty of opportunity for that to be variable. So in reality, you could have 10 different students take the assessment for the first time, and there would be enough variety of questions so that they don't all sit the same exam. There'll be something different. This, in some respects, prevents individuals prepping for a specific fixed exam where they maybe get word of mouth through other students to know exactly what questions are likely to come up. It ensures perhaps a little bit more honesty in understanding the subject matter and being taught to standards rather than taught to pass an exam. Now, the system that EuropeActive have chosen to use is an online platform known as Moodle. my apologies. There's many of you who perhaps are aware of Moodle as an online platform. It is an open source platform, which means that it uses developers from all over the world to help create the platform and how it works and operates, but it's a very effective platform. Now, when you work on the assessment modules built within the Moodle online platform, it provides currently 12 question types that you can assess with. Now, there are options to download other plugins and get further question types, but rather than complicate things, we worked with the options that are already built in the latest version of Moodle. Now, in considering that this would need to be an automated assessment, that the system could grade itself, that actually takes out a number of the options for questioning that would require an individual assessor to log in and review the students' answers and actually determine themselves what was right and wrong. So that takes us into 6 available questions. First of all, true and false questions, to be honest, are a little bit basic for a level 4 assessment because it's a 50-50 situation. So we removed that. Short answer questions will always require somebody to check and read. Or when you're building the question type, you actually have to think about every possible spelling variation, every possible option, and include those as potential answers so that the system will mark them as correct or not. So that becomes unrealistic in creating effective self-assessment by the system. Essay questions, as you can imagine, are not marked by the automated system. It would require an assessor and their time. Now, there's 2 options for calculated questions. Calculated questions then becomes more about checking their ability with mathematics rather than actually the knowledge they would need to know. So we removed those. And then random short answer marking, it's similar to short answers. You have to come up with all of the possible options that could ever be answered for that question. And so it creates too much obscurity around what the answer might be. So it leaves us with 6 options. And so those are the 6 question options that I used to develop the quiz that I've explained to you already. So there's multiple choice options, there's matching options, there are some numerical answers, although not a huge amount. There are drag and drop onto image or text where the individual has to select an answer item and to pull it into the right place on a particular diagram or into a text box. There's also drag and drop markers, and I'll show you examples of those. And then, of course, there's also select missing words, which is kind of like a fill in the gap type scenario where there's a sentence or a paragraph and someone has to put the right words into the right place so that that paragraph makes sense. So those are the 6 question types that the system already contains that would best fit an automated assessment process. So let me just work through those examples with you. So multiple choice, as I'm sure you're well aware, multiple choice is multiple choice, but there are ways of making a multiple choice question much more interesting. It doesn't just have to be text. So here's an example of one that I created. It has a video. These are just screenshots, so I can't play the video, unfortunately. But the individual is being asked to review the person's technique. They then play the video and watch what is taking place, and then they have to identify what this individual could do to improve her technique. They select the correct answer accordingly and submit the answer. So you can, with online tools, make even a multiple choice question much more engaging. And so we've got a range of similar questions like this to help make that process more engaging for the learner. Sometimes it's image-based, sometimes it might be asking them to determine a few things before they can answer the question, but we can make those engaging just by being more creative. This is a matching question. As you can imagine, it is very simple. It identifies a nutritional requirement. They're trying to identify the fatty acid profile for certain dominant fats. Now, that may sound complicated, but actually many people already in the public know what saturated and unsaturated fats are. And here what we're trying to do is to be sure that an instructor has an awareness of the sources of those things. And they would simply identify the category and match it up to the different types of common fats used in the diet. So again, a bit more engaging than just a simple multi-choice question. This is an example of a numerical answer. It's important, I think, in these sorts of scenarios that we don't try to catch people out if they don't have a keen memory on something like an equation. This is very much a BMR equation for basal metabolic rate, and we're inviting them to actually show that they know how to work that out. Now, I suppose you could justify and say that this is more about checking their maths, but it is for a tool that is vitally important that they know how to use, as a personal trainer. If you're going to calculate someone's BMR and therefore estimate what their calorie requirements are, you've absolutely got to know how to perform that equation correctly. All right, this particular question is an interesting one. It's a drag and drop. And so essentially what has to happen is the individual will look at the 3 examples of different interval training sessions or different cardiovascular training sessions, sorry, and they would have to identify which style of training is shown in this workout diagram. And they simply drag the correct answer to the correct box, and then they move forwards from there. So again, a little bit more engaging, nice and visual. I think they're great ways to help make the assessment process feel more interesting than just text. This is a drag and drop of marker items onto an image. These are interesting in that you can use any wide variety of images. They work really great for anatomy and physiology type questions. And the individual then has to, in this one, identify the correct movements that happen at the correct joint types. And then they drag the little circular marker that you can see in the top left corner. That little circular marker has to be placed within the zone that is identified on the picture so that the system can then identify if the correct marker has been placed in the correct place. And then last of all, we have when you have to select missing words. And so we've got here a sentence here all about ways of creating personal training products in a business scenario. And then the individual has to then read through that scenario and then put in the right words at the right points along the way from a drop-down menu. There is also the option to drag words into place into missed paragraphs, but I think the drop-down option helps to reduce the number of options. So you can see here, they only have to select from 3 choices, not from the 6 that are available in the paragraph. So those are the range of question types. Now, something that we wanted to do that I think would be very valuable is we wanted to be sure that you as training providers had an opportunity to trial some of the questions that we've currently built within the quiz. And so therefore, we've created a 15-question trial just for EuropeActive training providers and those of you who've attended this meeting. It's fairly short. It's a 30-minute test. So you've got about 2 minutes per question, which is plenty of time. And there's a 70% passing grade. Now, whether you pass or not is less of the issue for us at this early stage of development. What's more important for us is that when you finish doing the test and you've had a little trial of what it's like, that you have the opportunity then to complete some feedback for us. And once the test is finished, a feedback option will appear on the screen, and it invites you to rate 4 different questions based on the assessment and to provide us with comments and feedback on that. And that will be important for us because it will allow us to then review what has been done and what the experience was like for you as you went through that trial, and potentially make some changes or amends where needed. Now, I would kind of guide that feedback just a little. It's easy to say, I don't like a question, maybe because of the subject matter that has been chosen, but it's more about the feedback we're after. It's more about the process that's going on. Is the style of questions conducive to what you think is an appropriate assessment? Do you like the process of how it engages the learner during the assessment? It's those sort of things, and the feedback questionnaire that you will see will actually follow that route. It'll guide you a bit in trying to provide us with constructive feedback on how and why the assessment has been built. So those details we will email out to you, following this meeting in the near future, so that you have the opportunity to jump on board. And I'd really invite you to engage with this. Julian mentioned this might be a longer term process for us to be able to introduce a theoretical common assessment that all training providers might have to do. We are aware that obviously at the minute the questions are built in English, and there'll be many nations where they might prefer that the assessment strategy is built in their own language. And so as such, that is something we would consider as time progresses and as we look to introduce this. There may be those of you who are already keen to give this a try with your students and to see how it works as on an experimental level to begin with. For us, we're very, very keen to get this moving forward and to try and see how a common assessment strategy might have a positive benefit on helping a training provider to justify that they are meeting the standards set down by EuropeActive. And one of the ways to do that is to make sure all students pass through a common assessment, because then it doesn't matter what country you're in, the assessment minimum theory standard is being attained through this common assessment process. So I think at this point, that's probably all I've got to say at this point, and I can see a few questions have probably come in. So if I stop sharing, and then maybe we can do some Q&A from there.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Ben. Thanks for a detailed man as ever, Ben. It's thank you for all that hard work in constructing the theory assessment. I think we do have a couple of questions, Charlie, and I think you're going to pick one up, aren't you?
Probably, yeah. I feel like a trolley dolly. You know, they come on at the end and go, oh, "I've got the questions for you." You know. Okay, so Casper Casper Danborg, as it is, contacted us. How do we prevent students from cheating when assessment can be done at home in front of a PC? So Casper is absolutely right. We are discussing the idea of a theory assessment potentially being online, and there are a number of ways in which we could do that. So do we have all students sitting in your classrooms, and rather than filling in a theory exam, they bring a device with them to complete the assessment and you invigilate in-house? Do we have it that they do it at home through a platform that allows for a proctoring service? Whether that be live, real time, more likely it'll probably be an e-proctoring service where the computer kind of detects if you're off looking anywhere else but at the screen. Or actually, is there another way? And this is all part of the consultation. And following this session, Casper, there will be some questions coming out to you all. 8 questions. I am right in saying that, aren't I? It was 8. Julian?
I think it was 8.
But we would really appreciate you answering, everybody. We really need you to engage in this as part of the consultation around issues such as that. So absolutely valid question to have. Daniela Fon, thank you. Hi. Again, another question coming in about software solutions. And yes, there are different formats for doing it if we went down an online route. At the moment, the testing is purely in the Moodle platform that you'll have seen previously, but there are other ways in which we can deliver that online securely with various software solutions that allow students not to flip off the screen when in the exam, so to go into other areas of software. So again, it's part of the consultation. Please answer questions at the end. That sounds like I'm dodging the question. I apologise, Daniela, but it's all part of the consultation, and there are some questions around that.
Hey, Charlie, there is a thought there though, which hasn't been raised, which is an open book assessment acceptable? Because as I understand, this is not to be an assessment to replace assessments that the training providers do. That's not the purpose. A training provider can still have all of their own assessments, and they can check that their students know and understand in those invigilated type situations. This is a common assessment that would run alongside that. Now, you know, there's lots of ways that we assess students where they are allowed to refer to textbooks, you know, in case studies and in, you know, their practical preparations and program planning. They can refer to stuff to be sure that they understand it. In this situation, an open assessment that could allow them to refer to what they've already learned is still a possibility, because to answer many of the questions, the student will still need to have an understanding of what's being asked and be able to think through the process and answer the question. So I do still think that that is a possible option. Julian and I spoke just a little while ago about this, and one of the things we said is that as long as the time component is suitable but not too long, it limits how much time someone could actually invest in going to look for answers somewhere else, because you know, the number of questions they would have to answer in the time component is restricted. If someone's only got a minute and a half per question, there's not a lot of time to go looking around to get answers to certain things, to be honest. So it would still require that they are well prepared. But I don't see that as necessarily being a major issue, because they have to understand the question and still find a solution to that question. And it's something that I wouldn't rule out completely.
Okay, and Roberto has contacted us about, will training providers have some coaching help with implementation of the new assessment protocols during reaccreditation? Absolutely, Roberto. We would always support our training providers going through reaccreditation, but as part of this consultation, whatever end product we end up with regarding assessment, most of it would be coming from us in terms of how you implement, how you use that, what's the platform, what's the delivery method. So please don't concern yourselves now that you've all got to go out and rewrite assessments. That's not what we're discussing. It's the idea of us providing potentially a common assessment for theory and what that would look like. So please, I do implore everybody, those 8 questions that are going to be coming when we stop talking before your coffee break, please complete them. That would be really helpful.
Good.
They arrived. Just like
well, wow, they've just suddenly popped up on screen.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I assume everybody can see those, but
Yep.
please complete those, and that will be very useful for us. Yeah, just to say again, thanks to Ben for all his hard work and for explaining that for us. You can see that he's put a lot of thought into that in terms of how we have a theory assessment that is representative of the various assessment criteria, learning outcomes that actually covers the syllabus effectively. So thank you, Ben, for being so thorough. Yeah, so and again, just to stress that we have now put this out there. The theory assessment undoubtedly requires further discussion around areas such as translation, also those security aspects, and having the potential for a proctored situation, online proctoring, whatever that is. Ben's just raised the issue. Could it be an open book thing? Well, okay, and there's a timing issue there as well. But I would hope that we could pick this up, this discussion, at the Training Provider Coalition in May. So again, if you're not a part of the Training Provider Coalition, then please look into that, send us a message, and get involved, because we really want to mobilize our training providers, and what we don't want to do is disadvantage you in any way here. So yeah, good. I think we're a little bit over time, about 5 minutes over time. We've now got to think about 15 minutes to pop and make ourselves a cup of coffee and have a little break. Thank you, Ben. Thank you very much for that. Yeah, we've got about 15 minutes. I would urge you to please come back for the final session. It's a panel session. It's about the practical assessment, which I think in terms of timelines, etc., is more imminent than a common theory assessment that we would want to implement a practical thing. It's an area, a practical assessment. It's an area that we feel that we can impact on quite quickly, and we feel there is some variable practice out there that needs to be addressed. It's Charlie. It's going to be heading it up. She's very experienced in this area, but we have a panel session with representatives of our training providers in that panel. So please come back in. Yeah. About 10 to 15 minutes. I think that's going to be 22. Yes, it is 22 4 for you, most of you guys. Yeah, 20 to 4. Just checking. Okay, so see you shortly.
Guys, welcome to the afternoon session. I'm hoping, can you see the practical summative assessments at the moment on screen?
Yes.
Okay, good. So we're going to be talking about this and about your views. I'm very delighted to say that I have friends in the call today. So Jonathan is from Axelson's PT in Sweden. So thank you for joining us, Jonathan. And we also have Espen with us from AFPT in Norway, who is assisting us today as part of the panel session. So it's really fantastic to have both of you with me. Your experience in industry will be really fantastic for me to ask some questions to you guys and get your viewpoints around the practical assessments. As we discussed earlier and Julian mentioned, practical summative assessment is something that we need to look at here at EuropeActive. We have given guidance over the years on the expectations of what we're looking to see, but we appreciate there are some level differences in between different providers. So some people will do a practical and part of that is orally based. So it's a Viva presentation around rationale, for example. Whereas others, they're more focused on a session with a PT client, for example, that's been brought out of a case study. So there is variations, and it's something that we need to address. And I suppose my first question to you both would be, do you consider the practical assessment, the practical side of personal training to be universal?
Yeah, well, universal when it comes to it should have the exact same standards all over in a perfect world, yes. When it comes to the real world experiences, from what I know, there are different levels of both knowledge, development, and where the market is in the different countries. So I think it would be, in a perfect world, it should be necessary to have, you know, the exact same assignments for all the practicals and the theoreticals, and also with the learning outcomes in themselves. But knowing that there are some countries that I know that Norway and Sweden, for one, we are quite far ahead of a lot of other countries in the industry, because we've been doing this for many, many years. I've been doing this for 17 years. So we do know that we're quite far ahead. So I don't think it's realistic to put the exact same standards on every single one, unless you lower the standards a little. So by making it kind of like a two-step process, that the first you do is to put down the absolute minimum requirements, and then you can gradually increase it, so you actually get everybody on board. Because if you implement all the standards on everyone, I think there will be somebody that will be left behind, and you kind of lose the momentum.
Okay, and Jonathan, what are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, I've been working as a trainer myself in all around the world, and just the culture and the trends that are going on in the country can affect it a lot as well. So I agree with Espen. It's a challenging thing, because we do have variations, even though in a perfect world it should be quite similar.
And I think that's probably something that we here at EuropeActive would absolutely agree with. The real difficulty is trying to create a standard, kind of a minimum playing field for everybody. But also, you're absolutely right. Some of you as training providers, we have to have a commercial awareness when we're doing these updates, because you all like to offset yourselves in different ways, you know, and have certain assessments that you feel, you know, work really well for your students, and the way that differentiates you from another training provider. So what we're going to talk today and look at, and all our participants have received a copy of the proposal. It's a two-step assessment, where we have a modular assessment initially, looking at different methods of training, and then we have more of a one-to-one PT client session. Is any of this similar to what you do already? How would this fit, for example, in your training provider?
You want to go first, Espen?
Yeah, yes, I can.
So polite, you two.
Yeah. Well, it fits quite perfectly with what we do today, because I think that when you've been in the business for a long time, and I think Jonathan can attest to the same thing, you kind of find out what is necessary to use as a qualification tool to get the exact knowledge from the market. And we have based, over the last 17 years, we have based our exams primarily on what does the market need, and in addition to what did the EuropeActive expect, and what should be the perfect standard. So it's basically kind of like a mix of this. So I think we fit into absolutely, at least down to the very small detailed level, into all of this. What I would like to propose as a suggestion is that we don't take a step back in how we look at personal training, since it's supposed to be very individualized. It is supposed to be based on a client case. And there's also been had a discussion about the case study being very important in how you assess. It needs to be not as fixed, so that you have to have this and this and this included in the exam, because then there are some, just for instance, there are some clients where stretching and any kind of flexibility modality doesn't have its place. I know we've had this discussion before, and there are also some issues where weight management shouldn't have its place if you're looking at underweight people. So based on the client in themselves, there are some modalities that maybe shouldn't be used to assess them, but even though, because you can make a fake environment where I can take a hyper flexible customer and say, this is how I do flexibility, but it would still not be, it would not be appropriate, because I would just basically have to fake it because it's on the check.
You're meeting an assessment rather than what's in the person that's in front of us, which is the personal side of training.
Absolutely. And I think it's, when we come to this standard, where it needs to be necessary to give all the credit and the trust to the training providers, that they actually have the education and the standards in place. So no matter how the assessment goes, it should be based on the criteria that you've set in, because there will be so many different ways of conducting a personal training service.
Yeah.
I think it's quite difficult.
Yes. Jonathan, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, totally. No, and I think it's very similar to what we're doing at the moment. We do have a lot more focus on the interview aspect of the assessment as well. We're going more into detail on what questions should be asked, how they should be asked, like the interviewing part of it, to be able to get the information in the correct way and get all the information that they need.
Assessing those consultation skills of that learner. Exactly.
Yeah. And I mean, we all know it's one of the really important things, because no matter what you do, you're basing it on that interview, and it's important that it's well done in the correct way. But other than that, it's very similar to what we're doing.
And do you both use real life clients? That sounds awful, doesn't it? Do people use their peers in the classroom, or do they have, someone that they've got through internship, or, friend of the family that comes along to be their client for their studies? How do they use real clients or case studies, or do you propose case studies to them, like theoretically?
Well, we have a mix in our exam. So in the theoretical part, one part of the exam is, just to go back, the theory part, we have, like Ben said, we have that solution in place. So that's part of the education itself, where we have these multiple choice checkpoints along the way. Then when it comes to the theoretical exam, one of the parts is a short answer. The other part is a long-term client case study. That case study is the basis of the practical assessment afterwards.
Right, yeah.
But we're using a class peers, but we're doing it by random.
That theoretical client, yeah.
But there being, if there is not any particular needs or requirements, we use random selection of which peer you have in your exam.
Okay, right. And Jonathan, what about yourself?
Yeah, we have like a working, or what do you call it, a practical part of the course in which they have real clients. So throughout the very last part of the education is based on real clients, but then for the actual assessment, they're working with their peers.
Okay, brilliant. And so the assessments that we've put out for consultation on proposal is a two-part assessment. The first, that everyone can see on screen and refer to their own documents, is around methods of training. So there's advanced training methods that would be used as a personal trainer. And we've suggested that this be modularly done. So absolutely, as Espen, we recognise that creating that false environment for assessment, it's not really reflective of working with clients in a real life scenario. But we appreciate that as you guys would teach the course, you probably look at CV methods, maybe resistance, possibly separately. And so the learner would perhaps try those out in the gym as the course progresses through. So this is why we suggested perhaps it be modular, so that you could approach it however you wished, because training providers, you're absolutely right, Espen, we trust you guys to give you the flexibility to propose that into your program how you see fit. Looking at this, we've suggested that a learner should be assessed formally on at least 1 CV method, 2 resistance and 2 flexibility. Do you think that would be a proposal that you guys could put into place within your program? Is it something that you kind of do naturally occurring already, but just don't fill a form in for it? Or would this be replacing something that you do? Like, how easily would this particular assessment work for you guys in your provision?
Well, since this was sent out a while ago, we've already started to implement it to give you some, in a couple of months, we will have some feedback to you and see how it works. So we've basically just started implementing it. So all our teachers.
I should have known this from Espen. I should have only provided it like 12 hours before.
I'm so impressed with that. Espen, sorry.
No problem. So we've basically given it to all our lecturers, so they use it as a base of how they teach. So of course we have our setting in which we teach, but we try along the way to make certain that all our students are actually going through this assessment. It's not open as so the students don't know it. They just get informed that we're doing
just making in there and we're looking at them. Yeah.
So basically what we were able to do is to see how many of these things are we able to check off, which ones is working well, which ones are kind of overlapping. So we're trying to do that to give you some data so you can actually work with and see. We have about 500 students at the time. So basically we have quite a large body of evidence that we will have after a short while. And we're running many lectures at the same time in different subjects. So we see how much data we can put in and provide to you. But it seems like this will be a natural part of the teaching process. So,
and very much so, the idea of doing that modular assessment was it forms part of the kind of delivery and curriculum, as opposed to very much a, right, you finished your course, boom, let's do 50,000 assessments today.
Yeah, I think the smart thing would be, this is just my perspective, it is to have that as a guideline, to say that during the lectures in these and these subjects, this should be something that should be kind of like a working sheet, that at least the teachers know that this is something that they should check off and make certain that they run through everything. So we basically check everything off. I don't think it's necessary to have this as a practical assessment in addition to everything else, because it turns out to be a lot of assessments. And so it's all about building it into the education
curriculum.
Yes.
And what about yourself, Jonathan? What do you think?
Yeah, no, but totally agree with that. And I think it's interesting to see, because with the question that came up earlier as well, in regards to how we can control if someone's doing the theoretical assessment at home and so on. We've been handling that question a lot, and sort of boil it down to removing a bit of pressure from the one day that the assessment is performed, and sort of trying to see it more as exactly. So we're trying to look at it more along the way, like how can we implement smaller controls throughout the course to see that the student is actually following up and not just having a bad or a good day on the assessment day. So I think this is in line with that, which is really interesting, because I personally am a big fan of it.
Okay, good. And then I think part of that, obviously the criteria in there, very reflective in terms of what we look at from that learner when they're delivering that type of approach, is very similar to what you would look for in a one-to-one observation, of course. And like you said, it's almost like a mini sort of practice for them, because they can get feedback from that, probably that module assessment as they're going through the course to kind of perfect those skills. Because when I look at skills of a personal trainer, what do you consider those essential skills that we're looking at for observation? When we're observing somebody, what do you consider those essential skills? Does this reflect those? Does it assess those skills that that person should have to go off into the world and PT a client? Jonathan, I'll come to you first.
I think it does. I would, again, kind of back to what we talked about before with the interview part of it. I think it's lacking a bit there. But other than that, I think it's like it's kind of broad, but that's what it has to be. So no, I like it. I think it's.
And would you potentially add to this? Because so we're giving this potentially, it's in consultation, but as a baseline. So here's where we think is a good middle ground. Would you potentially use this yourself and add criteria in? Perhaps you might see a consultation start of it, or you know, would you perhaps modify? So yes, here's the bridge work that you must retain. You know, here's the standardized assessment, but potentially would you slot it in with other parts of your own assessment?
Yeah, no, and I think that's also along the lines of what Espen said, that if your sort of mission and goal is to set the minimum level, then each training provider can then build it out and adjust it accordingly to what their course is like and what they have sort of specialized or brought up further than that. So yeah, I think it's a good base, and I think it's a good level for what the goal and the mission here is.
And Espen, yourself?
Yeah, well, I think one of the most important things is to see what do we actually evaluate. And when it comes to this trade, this profession, it is absolutely a personal based business. So we have to be a little careful of not going too far into the science part and forgetting about the human part. That's one, and I can speak for at least for all the providers that we have in their series in Norway. I do know that each and every one have absolutely good standards when it comes to the pure knowledge, the education in itself, the delivery models. I know that the content of the education is more than good enough in general. what we see is that doesn't give the success rate for the personal training when they come into the market, because that is actually that's what mom and dad taught you when you were little. You know, that's kind of common sense and being able to be around people. And I think
Personal
that's
skills.
absolutely. I think that's why the consultation that Jonathan is talking about is so very important. The hard thing is that how do you evaluate that? And you have to evaluate at the right time, because we see, of course, like most training provider, we see some people that come into the education and you basically almost give them zero chance of succeeding in the market, because you kind of just tear your hair out and say, how can this person ever develop into a personal trainer? Then
We've all had that learner, Espen. We've all had one.
Absolutely. But then along the way, this person might have a learning curve that is amazing and turns out to be absolutely wonderful at what they do. So we have to be careful, and when we put this consultation, these skill measuring in, so, and also with the science part, so we don't put it in too early. That's why we're trying to implement it as early as we do now. So basically from day one, we have this document that you're showing us as a checklist to see where does it actually fit into the education. Should it come in beginning? Should it be gradually introduced? Should it be based from day one all the way?
When does it maybe naturally occur in their
Absolutely.
program?
There's we have different study styles, and especially now with the corona and COVID and everything that's been digitalized, people do this in, you know, back and forth. It's not a steady study like it was before.
It's not as straightforward, is it? And
No.
every learner has that line, don't they? Like you say, people peak at different times in the program.
Absolutely.
So I think the modular assessment in that respect would be quite good, because you can break it up and do it as and when it fits. And something I've got to ask you guys, because this isn't a question I don't know, we put in some training methods: CV, resistance, flexibility. You can see them here on the screen. Are they kind of universal terms? We didn't know if they have completely different sort of names elsewhere, or are these the universal names of these approaches? And I know, you know, we are dealing with 38 different countries here in Europe, and a number of languages with that. Are these things that you quite easily recognise, and you know, they might have a different name, obviously, slightly, but
that's one of the feedbacks that I saw when I prepared for this session. And for once, you're using the peripheral hard action training. That was something that was developed back in 1960 of a guy named Bob Geisler, that they looked at, you know, the effects of you know, cardiovascular effects of mostly on the strength training and weight reduction. But using that term kind of excludes everything else, because what happens is that you look at this as this is the go-to method, but you have several other methods that are exactly the same, they just have a different name.
So perhaps that list needs to be bigger, perhaps.
Absolutely. And you, for instance, you have the German body composition training that Charles Poliquin put in. That's exactly more or less the same as the PHA. You have the escalating density training by Charles Staley that's been in there for 20 years. So being careful of not saying that these are the only methods you are allowed to use,
because this could be seen as these are the methods that we suggest, if that makes sense.
Yes.
This is just mine, and this is just our ignorance here at EuropeActive in terms of, are these the same methods understood elsewhere, or they have the same names? So they are recognised, but perhaps those lists maybe need to be bigger outside of the consultation.
Yeah, I think so. And we've done we're starting to do a lot of business now outside of Norway. And what we see is we're trying to expand, and we see that in some countries, some training methods that went out of style in Norway or Sweden 20 years ago, they're actually catching on now. So we're having discussions that was actually done in the early 2000s today in different countries.
Everything comes back around.
Yes.
We know that. Hold on to your mum and dad's clothes, they'll be back.
Absolutely. So it has to be generic, it has to be a little bit more general, and not the name droppings, because that will also, you know, make you take a commercial stand saying that this is good, but this is not good. So from a commercial business point, it's also smart.
And do you agree, Jonathan, with that in terms of expanding that list potentially outside the consultation?
Yeah, and I'd say maybe even work with more of like a description of what it is you want. You want specific resistance methods, and let the training providers sort of come up with whatever is popular and doable in their country and according to the trends that are going.
And we recognise that, because one thing, exactly as you've said, in different countries, the way in which it's delivered, and like you say, is that trend culture almost. We want to give you that flexibility to recognise the market locally for you, because ultimately that's what you're putting your personal trainer out into. But we just wanted to make sure that sometimes PT sessions, people see them as purely, we're looking at the skills of observing that person with the client, how they interact, those interpersonal skills, how they approach, correct, you know, adaptations that they might give where they're appropriate, which are all fantastic, but we also need to assess that they understand how to do a progressive program, how to get learner from point A to point B, you know, over time. And that's where the advanced methods came in, as opposed to our second assessment that is proposed, which would be more probably seen as being towards the end of program, the more traditional one-to-one with a client based on a case study, whether that is a given, theoretical, the person in front of them that they've worked with. Interestingly, Jonathan, we haven't really touched about the consultation in these practical assessments. One of the reasons is for that is because, again, it comes back to this locality, how people do it quite differently and what would be the common criteria that we assess. Some people's consultation skills might be more hands-on than others, and that sometimes is purely due to a cultural thing. You know, so it was looking at that, and do we leave that with training providers and purely work more on the one-to-one skill of when they step foot in that gym? So that's probably the point at which we propose to pick this up. How does this sort of session reflect to what you guys are doing already? Is it kind of reflective of what you have at the moment? Different? Just so in terms of the second one.
Well, we have 3 different PT sessions that's being done, basically 3 parts of the personal training program. That is the practical. One is the P2 one-to-one, one client, one trainer. Then we have a semi-private, and then we have a little bit more advanced. And in all these sessions, the client is evaluated more or less against these standards.
Okay, so quite similar.
Yeah, basically both on the one-to-one delivery, the 1 to 4 to 6 delivery, and also on advanced methods. So we see that this kind of fits in with everything. But again, not everybody has the same format in their education as we have.
And we appreciate that's going to be a bigger jump for some providers, partly why we're having the conversation, if the truth be told, because we know some providers aren't kind of meeting this at the moment. So, but it wouldn't be too much of a step potentially to put this in 6 months' time, for example.
Speaking for us, no, it wouldn't. But again, that doesn't reflect everyone else.
What about yourself, Jonathan?
Yeah, no, it's similar to what we're doing. We did a quite big rework of the education and the overall routines a while back. And what we did is we expanded the practical assessment with basically bringing in more advanced techniques. So we have part 1 of the assessment would be very similar to what you have here. And the second part is going through the more advanced skills, but we were then doing it on the same day rather than having it spread out.
So this isn't too far removed from what you're doing. Something that we did put in was about having a rationale for the plan session, so that the assessor would have a brief to understand where that session comes from. You know, is it, you know, week 3 of an 8-week program? Is it this client who's got this particular goal and therefore I'm doing this? Do you feel that has value here? Obviously, clearly, it probably discussed maybe more in a case study. I kind of get the impression from you both that obviously you do a much more detailed case study. But do you think that has a value in the practical assessment to have somewhere where the learner comes in and says, look, this is the session I'm going to deliver for the next hour, and this is why I'm doing X, Y, and Z?
That's part of the kind of like what the case study is like, because in our theoretical case study, and also that is the subject of the practical assessment, is that they have to show both a program from the beginning of this cycle they're in, so the periodization, so when they start training, but also at the end to reflect how have you thought about the progressions, both exercise-wise, intensity-wise, and loads and everything else, to see if it goes towards the goals. And also what we see is that in general, there are 2 subjects that all our clients are most unsure about. That's program design. That's number 1. And that's making periodized plans. Yes, periodized plans. How do I plan over the long run? So that is the biggest thing, because one thing is knowing that 3 sets of 8 with 60 seconds rest gives you this now, but how do you do this if you have a client that works with you for 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, or 2 years, or for a specific goal, that is where the big issue comes in. And that's why I think you have to be a little careful of trying to put in more and more stuff, and instead make certain that the client or the students know the necessary tools. And as of today, we do know that is, they have to know their anatomy and biomechanics. We have to take into account the degrading health of people in general to make certain that people are more prepared of the lifestyle diseases they're meeting, and also how do I build programs over a longer period of time with both progressions and regressions. So those would be the three big areas that I would focus on, instead of putting in more criteria just to have more criteria to assess.
Yeah, no, and that's kind of what we want to strip out, and which is why we've moved the standards to being qualifications in terms of those learning outcomes and assessment, is to make them easier to go, what do I need to do as a provider? It could be quite wordy looking at the standards originally. Jonathan, are you kind of in agreement? So the consultation, I totally agree. The consultation into the planning is almost an assessment in itself, and would you agree it doesn't have a place maybe here? This is purely on kind of that one-to-one practical, how do I act with you as my client in the gym environment?
Yeah.
Okay,
totally.
Cool. So that'll be our conversation next year. Everyone put it in their diary. Training Provider Forum next year, we'll be discussing case study. And then in terms of the session, obviously we've kind of divided the criteria into kind of an A, B, and C section. Kind of A, hi, I'm Charlie, I'm going to be your PT today. You know, this is what we're going to be doing. Are you safe, healthy, well? And then the coaching side of it, we've moved away from saying, right, we need to see, and we're very aware, some awarding organisations will say, right, I want to see CV and I want to see resistance. And we've had this conversation, Espen, that's not always appropriate. So we've kind of gone with a warm up, main, cool down as you feel appropriate. Would that kind of fit in terms of we giving kind of minimum timings that we'd expect to see? Because we kind of looked at this and said, right, a 40-minute session, intro, saying bye to your client, 45 minutes is kind of a standard PT session, you know, anywhere between there and an hour. Would that kind of work for you guys in terms of your locality and your experience?
Yeah, I think speaking for us, I think it will. Depending on, you know, the market in itself, because we see that there's a growing popularity of shorter PT sessions, just to lower the costs for the clients.
Yeah.
So that's number one. And it's been automatic since I took my first personal training education in 1991.
You don't look a day over 25, Espen.
No, yeah, well, close. So I've done this for 30 years and you can still remember how it was. This was the way it was. It's always been 1 hour personal training session. And I've worked with many clients and I've had trainers myself also. And some of the sessions has been 3 hours. Some of the sessions has been 12 minutes. So it's a huge discrepancy of what it is. And based on the trends in the different markets and what is common, for instance, in some of the Arab countries where CrossFit is really, really, really taking on, the personal training session takes like 2.5 hours. So that's a completely different world. And if you go to the other end of the spectrum where they have some high intensity training, it takes them 15 minutes.
15 minutes, yeah.
So again, you just have to put on, this is the time we want. So because you have to take a stand and say that this is what we want in our assessment, because if you leave it up to everyone, it will be all over the place.
So do you feel those would be appropriate minimum timings?
Yes.
You know, minimum.
Yes.
Jonathan, are you sort of a similar feel?
Yeah.
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 We've got
100%.
Ticks in the box. Lovely. And so in terms of, excuse me if I'm wrong, but generally from what you've seen, nothing has made you recoil in horror. These are pretty similar to what you're doing, either be it in a coaching, in a kind of curriculum delivery at the moment, and as a final practical assessment. So not moving you too far from where your curriculums kind of currently are. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, it is. And I think it's, if you take this document and say that during the course of study, this document should be basically all the boxes should be checked off.
By the end of the course.
Yeah, you are basically on the right track. If you say that this will come in addition to everything else and it has to be at this time, then I think it will be quite hard for some people to just change everything around and change their education overnight. So, but if you could put down and say that during these standards, each client or each student should go through this checklist, and our job is to make certain that each student goes through that checklist, then I think you're absolutely on the right track. And this would more it would make it less complicated for us as training providers, instead
To
of
know the expectation.
yes, instead of the enormous documentation that was needed for the accreditation, where there are also so much overlap. So
Yeah.
it's impossible to know, okay, well, does these
This
hours
makes
fit?
it easier for you to say, yes, we can meet that. Give us that.
Absolutely. So it makes
Okay.
it easier for the training providers. I think that's step one, to get as many as possible on board. Now you have 38 countries. And I think to get as many on board as possible, you need to make certain that the effort that they have to put in and the financial resource that they have to set aside to do this should be as low as possible to get everybody on board. And then you can build from that. Because I think that one of the biggest problems mistakes you can do is to be too ambitious and you lose some. And then you
Yeah.
have to start all over. So it's all about
Yeah.
getting everybody on board, and
It's
then you
steps, absolutely,
yes.
taking people with us, and absolutely, we do not want to alienate anybody at all. You will all recognise, probably, talking to everyone at home, is that over the last couple of years we have improved our quality, we've put in more process, more expectation, and we've lost people along the way. That is the truth. You know, we've had training providers that aren't able to meet guided learning hours, the requirements, you know, and that's okay, because actually we're really proud of the providers we work with. You are all really quality in what you do, and we have a suspicion that this probably isn't too far removed from what many of you do, but it's trying to find that common assessment and line. Jonathan, your thoughts similar to Espen in that?
Yeah, they're similar. The only thing I was sort of curious about is, like in Sweden, we have another organization that is qualifying training providers as well, called Frisk, and they have sort of a standardized testing as well. So it will be interesting to see how we can kind of bring them together and see, okay, how will that work out? But I'm sure you'll figure it out, and I think it's a really good thing to be doing.
Okay, good. So it kind of leads me on to my next question here. Do you feel there is a value in that common practical assessment strategy across EuropeActive training providers, whatever country you're in? Let's model it on the idea of being roughly what we've talked about today. Do you feel that adds value both to EuropeActive as an accredited training provider, but also for yourselves as individuals who are the EuropeActive training providers?
Definitely. And I think it's such a good thing to sort of lean on, also to check up on the level on which we're at, to see, okay, are the students being taught what they need to be taught? Like, are we in line with what's expected of us? We can all look at the standards, but this makes it so much more well, hands-on. Like, we can really look into it and see that, yeah, this is a problem. We're doing what we're supposed to be doing, and it's easy to follow. So I really like it, and I think it will bring a new level of quality for EuropeActive as well.
Can we stop talking there? I've had a yes from Espen, I've had a yes from Jonathan. Can we just end the call now, Julian? No, but Espen, again, do you feel, yes, this is good for both you as a business as well as, you know, that common for EuropeActive point of view?
A short answer, absolutely yes. And I have a couple of suggestions. I know they could be complicated to put in place, but I absolutely loved what Anna said, where she's looking at the output. What kind of product are we actually creating when we have the personal training education? Because no matter how good the education is on paper, you have to look on what is the outcome, what is the result of when the product is over. And also what Ben did with his test, we have done that since 2011. We've had that same system in place where we have actually 260 tests that are kind of like checkpoints, or questions that are checkpoints that they have to go through. That is also an open book, multiple choice, but they have to make certain that they are actually on track. So if there was a possibility of implementing some kind of common tests, so if you or me, I as a student wanted to be a part of the EREPs, I had to do a test. That test, if I pass, you're okay, you're in. If you don't test, you have a retake. If you don't pass that one, you have to wait for 6 months, for instance, to make certain that you actually check what is on who comes in. Because now on one hand, you have to trust us that the education is good, that our assessment is good enough, but even though we say it is, you still don't have control.
Yeah,
over
we're
it.
trying to test it. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So if there was one way of putting, you could do, Ben did it. That's a tremendous good job to do. So if you could expand on that and make that even bigger, it could be kind of like the entry test to be admitted as a student. Yeah. So that the hard thing would be the practicals, but at least you could do it on the theory. You could start with the theory and say, to get into the EREPs, to get into registry, you have to pass this test, and you have to redo that test every year with different questions to make sure that you hold the standards. And that way you can build on the question base and make it more and more advanced, and basically reflect what's going on in the science industry, and to make certain that people can keep their standards up. So that we try to implement that in Norway, but it's very hard as an individual provider to say we have the test, so every other one have to come to us. That of course our competitors or colleagues would not like to do that, because that would kind of give us the upper hand in the market. But if you as an institution did it, and everybody that wanted to have their students into the EREPs had to send their students to this test, then you could actually be that governing body, which a commercial actor like us can't be.
Yeah. And Jonathan?
Wow.
Oh, sorry.
That's a hell of a statement, Espen. Sorry, Charlie, I can't resist saying something, but I'll come back to that. Sorry.
I must mute him.
Yeah, no, please, shut me up.
Note to self, turn him off. Jonathan?
I think that's a really interesting suggestion, and I really like it. I think overall, it would be good to kind of build on the engagement from the students in the EREPs registry, like not only having a test to do once a year, perhaps, but also being the place where they can get additional information on the new studies, keep updated, and stay on track with what's going on.
And that is something we're definitely trying to build on, Jonathan. So hopefully you guys will have all seen, that are listening in today, you will have seen that the EREPs, can't get my words out, resource library has launched. So that has a range of different podcasts, webinars, books, articles, events that we think are really good for EREPs members to get involved with in terms of continuing that path of study. And if any of you training providers have resources that you feel would be appropriate for that, then please obviously get in touch. And obviously we're going to be bringing back EREPs webinars very shortly, again part of that lifelong learning programme. And as Julian alluded to earlier, there is this master trainer coming out, which will very much be heavily based around that continued professional development that people do once becoming into industry. So there will need to be a level of experience alongside that continued professional development. So there is definitely that path to go down. And what Espen has said in terms of an access assessment, if that's the right word, to get to EREPs for those perhaps that don't come through the training providers, with that more standardised approach, that is something we look at. The difficulty, the downside, the bit that we have to manage is how do we do that? We have 38 different countries, we have 70 something countries worldwide with a number of languages that go with that. How do we securely monitor that testing? How do we make sure it's appropriate in terms of the levels? Because you guys obviously have alluded earlier, there are those differences in terms of localities. So these are the challenges of which your feedback today from all the people that are listening and have done those poll questions is really going to help to inform. And Julian's come back in. Shall I let him speak?
Well, it's risky. It's risky, Charlie. I was just really interested in what Espen had to say there in terms of the theory assessment and his view on that. I mean, and that point that I think there, Charlie, you were saying, well, we could have this theory assessment, but for those people who haven't come through a training provider. But what Espen is alluding to there, I think, is that well, no, this could be for everybody, whether they're coming through an accredited training provider or whether they're coming through it could be for those individuals who've come a different route as well. But I think Espen was referring it to it being for everyone. Is that right, Espen?
No, I was actually thinking about all the students that are coming from the training providers, because in that way you could, because Ben has done a wonderful job so far from what he presented. He has actually broken down all the criteria and the categories and all the goals that are necessary to know. So he's basically done that. And so if you could expand on that and maybe make it even bigger, so you have a bigger base of questions, or maybe expand on it a little, you could actually make certain that even though it would be an open book, it would still be a checkpoint. So you have to do the work. And if you could put in like a 30-second time limit on every question and make some of the question very hard, and not put the passing grade on 70%, but put it on 80 or 90%, you would actually make certain that people would have to study. They would have to have the necessary knowledge. That would ease up on the training providers, because if we don't deliver students that are good enough to pass that test, we will not survive, because we don't deserve to survive, because we're not delivering a good product. So that would basically make certain that we could actually fill those criteria that Ben has now put down.
That's so interesting. I mean, the fact that you're referring, I know Ben referred to the open book scenario, and obviously the timing issue is there as well. That if you put that time pressure on people, that it prohibits them just having too much time where it becomes too easy. So that's really interesting that you would be in favor of that, Espen. And I guess so. If that individual is coming through Jonathan or your training provider, and they come to this theory assessment, does that replace the theory assessment that you already have?
No. This would be a checkpoint. It would be to make certain that the criteria that the EuropeActive has today for the accreditation and reaccreditation could maybe be simplified a little, to make certain that the resources that are being used on going through that process and making certain that all the boxes are checked could be a little easier. We would still have the practical exam. You would still have the documentation that we do what we're supposed to do. A little down the alley of where Anna says that we have to make certain that the product in the end is good enough. But then you will have another checkpoint, which is basically getting into the reps. That way you could actually check off, are we doing what we're supposed to do? Are we checking off the boxes in our education? And if you do like a random test, instead of having anatomy questions done after each other, you could have a random test where they come from all categories, and then a time limit. Then you would actually exclude at least the parts of the possibility of having an open book, because you don't sit with kind of like 25 folders up at the same time. Is it anatomy or nutrition? So you could basically correct for some of that along the way. So it would be an addition to do what we have, but it would ease up on the accreditation process, all the documentation you have to provide.
Yeah, well, well, Charlie might have something to say on easing up on that documentation, Charlie? But
me and Espen are going to fall out again, you say?
one thing, sorry, Charlie, the last thing, honestly. But
I should never have unmuted him.
No, you shouldn't have. I mean, for both of you, really, I mean, that suggests that yes, that if you had that common test, that that could be a vehicle to get onto EREPs. And I hesitate to mention this because Charlie will not thank me, but add
it to a list.
That would suggest, wouldn't it, that could almost be certificated. So all I'm suggesting there, guys, is you're going to certificate your learners. That's your prerogative, and that's fantastic. And I'm sure your certifications are much sought after. But at the same time, if there was an additional certification associated with a common assessment, and that had the European stamp on it, so you could call it a certificate in personal training, you could call it what you want, would that have value to you? Would it conflict with what you're trying to achieve? These are the questions I have in my head.
I think it would be a very good addition, both especially for EuropeActive, because what you could do with the people that pass this exam and get into the EREPs, you could make a map of all the approved trainers all around the world in the 38 countries. So basically you would have a quality insurance in place where people that go through that test will be found on that website. So you could actually use the EuropeActive to be like a hub of all personal trainers that is being certified and that's been recertified, because I don't know the facts, but I would suspect that some people that get into the EREPs, they don't stay forever. But if you got them in, you could hold them at that time and provide some extra service. So which could be, and you could take £10 a year, €10 a year from each student to make sure that you finance this and give them some extra value, it would be worthwhile to stay in the EREPS community. That would make it much easier to build, because now you're filling the bathtub in one end and you're pouring it out in the other end. So if you could just block it in the end, so no water runs out, so no student escapes, you would actually have them in, you would have more commercial value also. And of course, if you have, instead of 13,000 members, if you had 130,000 members, you would have more political body also. You would have more power. So
the difficulty we have there, Espen, I'm just going to play devil's advocate here since Julian's brought it up. The difficulty we have here is that a lot of EREPS members actually did not come through training providers. So this is the challenge, okay? So we have people that have years of experience, that have been on the register, perhaps for some of them 4 years, but didn't necessarily come through an accredited training provider. So this is sometimes the difficulty with when we're looking at these things, is when we're talking about, you know, putting in a common assessment. Yes, practical, I think we've kind of talked about, and that would be quite an easy one to put in across our accredited providers. When we talk about theory assessment, there would be a cost with that additional. And the truth is, sometimes we have people trying to avoid the cost of registering their members to EREPS. That's a challenge we have already.
Yeah.
So the concern here always commercially is we don't want to devalue the value of EREPS, if that makes sense, because if you put a certificate and say that's more valuable, then what does that mean for EREPS that we all kind of value and love and have had for a long time and recognise? So these are the challenges, which is why we need that feedback so desperately to work out how we navigate that moving forward.
I understand. I understand it. At the same time, isn't this what we call evolution? And
I think we've evolved a lot.
Yeah, we know better, we do better. 20 years ago, you didn't have to have a personal trainer certification at all. You could just, write on the back of your t-shirt. Yeah, so now it's kind of, the world is changing. And so even though you have a lot of people that hasn't gone through a training providers, if they have to do a test, it will reflect, do they know what they're supposed to know or not? If they don't, well, maybe they shouldn't fit in the system, because that's the standard.
It's not so much the testing of it, it's kind of the commercial side of it, is will we lose people as a result of that?
Well, Charlie, yeah.
These are the conversations.
There are always issues. I would just add there that, you say a lot, but most of the people that we have on EREPS come through training providers. That's upwards of 80%. So, yes, there are people that come to us and we have to look at the qualifications and experience they have. But if we had a test in place, that would actually give us more assurance rather than just the attribution process that we already have. So I'm sure these things could be worked out. But I'm just listening. Jonathan's very quiet. Sorry.
I've got some questions for them all. Can I ask some questions?
Yeah, of course. Sorry, I'll shut up.
Okay, so Olivia at Physical Coaching Academy, he likes the idea of the common practical assessment, thinks that will be that quality education, that guarantee. So that's really reflective of what you both said. Rosita for us has asked the question, do you think having a licensed assessment centre for this, so in terms of having that common assessment, if you put that in place, is this, and please, I do apologise if I'm getting this wrong, do you suggest that the test would be available to everyone, which is what we've just talked about, even if they haven't come through an EREPS accredited course, which I think is what is the conversation that's being had, is the idea that everyone would sit this test? And would training providers potentially act as testing centres for these common assessments?
I think that you have to take a stand on, do you want to include everyone at all costs, or do you want to put down a standard and say this is our standard? So this is a political discussion that you need to have, as always. But it's all about, if you don't have somebody that comes through a training provider. Julian told us that you're looking at their criteria, they're looking at their education, see do you fit in or not. And if you come to the point of, they're okay, well, send them through the test. If they're okay, they will end up in the website. And when it comes to cost, I don't think there are so many people that would object to paying €10 a year if there is some additional value in being in the EREPS that actually exceeds the €10 you pay. So you get access to the website, you're being put on the map, you are an accredited or certified student personal trainer, and you get some extra value and you pay the 10 euros. I think that should not be the problem. I don't think you will lose more people doing that. But I think you have to take a stand in, should we include everyone, or should this be through the training providers? Because if you include everyone, you say that we actually don't care that you come through a training provider. So why should we be a part of the EREPs? And why should we be a part of the EuropeActive and pay lots of money and do a lot of paperwork if it really doesn't matter? Because all our students could apply anyway.
Yeah, well, it definitely does matter. And
Yeah,
a lot of people that do apply outside, and just to reassure, when people do apply outside training providers, you know, we unfortunately, some of those people we're unable to submit to EREPs, and we always push them back to our accredited training providers. Something that Olivia's brought up was wouldn't be an approval of our exams, but so basically, I think I'm getting the sense of, according to their exams they do now, they do very strict standards. Would that not be better to look at their exams rather than potentially adding an additional one? So here's a thought just out there. Would potentially giving you guys questions that we want included within your exams, would that be useful, or would you always want it as something separate?
No, that would be fine.
Jonathan?
Yeah, and I think we can draw some value from the technical improvements and that we have right now, and perhaps look at a way of doing a standardized test, as in a test which you guys have access to the results as well as we do. So that way it could be the same test. It wouldn't have to be two different ones.
Yeah, so potentially trying to amalgamate what we'd like to see as questioning into, you know, here's what we want you to include, and potentially you could go off and include said within that test.
But I would suggest that there came a suggestion or some demands that out of 100 questions, 5 questions should be from a base that you supply. Because if you make a common test for every single one, there is no reason for me to pick a different training provider.
Yeah, because we've still got to leave you your commercial choice, if that makes sense, how you differentiate yourself in the market. Yes,
absolutely.
So if we said, right, here's 30 questions as an example, we want those included, and if you want to do a 100 question test or a 50 question test, but that's what we need to. So it's about similar to what we talked about the practical. Here's the minimum we need to see. Could you level that up, you know, as you wish to? Okay, we're doing well on time. So can I have anything else to add from either of you before we ask for the poll questions to be completed?
Yeah, it was just my thoughts on the conversation that you guys had before. We just went through the school that I'm running has just started a skin therapist, beautician education. And in Sweden, they have a really, really strong organization for beauticians. And they've managed to make it the one organization that everyone needs to be part of in order to work as a beautician in Sweden. And I've been really interested in looking into how they created it and what kind of value it brings. And I think if you guys were to create that same environment and manage to get everyone as keen on being members in EREPs and EuropeActive, that could be that could sort of remove a lot of the issues or the worries here. And I think the work you've done so far is great, but I think a lot more interaction and making it easier and more beneficial to be part of it and active would be a good first step.
We're definitely trying to do that, and we are trying to be more interactive and more available, whilst trying to obviously keep that standard very consistent. There is a lot of work going on the EuropeActive side of things in terms of national registers, the alliance working there. So there's lots of work trying to happen out with established national registers, for example, to try and increase that presence of EREPs and that EuropeActive standard. So yeah, it's a process. That's the honest truth of it. And there's, you know, we get in there. You know, you think about the things that we've tackled in the last sort of 2 years, in terms of learning hours and online accreditations and, you know, things that we didn't think would be easy to have conversations around, and we've got there, you know. So these assessments is kind of the next step, and practical seems to be a good first step because it seems to be that common place. No one's kind of messaged on the chat feedbacked on a QA saying that, oh, this is horrendous, this is nothing like what we do currently already. So I think that would possibly be a good place.
Could I just ask that, guys, sorry, Charlie, just ask Jonathan there, you said, you know, consult more. Consult with who? Sorry, who are you referring to? So training providers, consult more with training providers, consult more with EREPS members, consult
I'm
more.
thinking as a personal trainer, once you're educated, once you have your license from us and you're becoming part of EREPS, then look more at the personal trainer's aspect of it all. What does the personal trainer get out of being part of EREPS? Like the national registry would be a great thing, but I think you need to work more on the daily sort of communication or engagement, like make the websites awesome for getting the latest science, or have really engaging podcasts or webinars or whatever it is. Yeah.
So it's so interesting because, you know, I think about that stuff and hence why we had the webinars last year, and we're coming back with some webinars, and, you know, I would love to have lots of training providers involved in those webinars. So we are providing information, but sometimes I worry, guys, that, you know, if we put too much up there, that we might get accused by our accredited training providers of, not that our accredited training providers would ever accuse us of anything, but that we're almost taking on their role. You know, that we're providing some element of training, and I don't want to step on anybody's toes here, but at the same time, I do see that, you know, we can inform as well. You know, we can contribute to lifelong learning.
Yeah, I don't see that as an issue, like at all from our side, at least. I think it's a sort of the obvious thing that you would want to do. So I hope no one will get mad if you want to keep teaching our
Jonathan
students
up to the next
things.
talk.
Yeah. What do you think, Espen?
You know, it depends on the political standpoint you take behind the information you share. And we do know we have 5,500 articles on our website that we've created over the years. So we're being used as a resource. In that, we also, of course, write about stuff that happens in our house. And there are some ads, of course, in them. If you want to read more about this or learn more about this, we have this education.
Yeah.
As long as you don't take that route, I think everybody would just appreciate if you basically put out and said, you know, Johnson said, put out some research abstracts. This is what's been going on in this field, this field, and this field. Do it once a month. Provide a map where people can register if they go through the test, so you could actually have an extra value of being in the register. Give them some giveaway, give them some gadgets, something that gives them more value. Then you wouldn't step on our toes. I don't think you would step on anybody's toes, as long as
I mean, interesting though. I mean, traditionally, and sorry, I'll keep an eye on the time, but traditionally, you know, it has been a question of resources. That in order, you know, for us to produce content is really quite hard. We're a relatively small team, and that's a big ask. But of course, we do have all this expertise out there in terms of the training providers that you guys, you know, I used to work for a training provider. We produce a hell of a lot of content, you know, for our students. But, you know, would you guys be prepared to contribute some of that content to us? You know, it increases your profile. It marks you up to, you know, potential people that might come on your courses, whether that's lifelong learning courses or.
And can I just interject there? We have asked for that. So there are emails that go out to training providers asking you to get involved. And I'd like to say thank you to Base Training, for example, AFPT, your podcast is on the resource library, you know, Studio One, think of some. So there are people that do offer their resources, but if there is anyone listening and thinks they have valuable resource, that's why we have the EuropeActive resource library, is to advertise that content available to members, as well as obviously bringing back the webinars. Can we launch the poll, please, Julian?
Yeah, launch away.
All right, and just like that, Robbie, come on, work with me. Yes, look at that, as if by magic. Please, everybody on the call, could you please complete the poll? It's going to be really important, kind of informing us after the basis of the conversation. You've seen what the practical looks like. Please give us some of your honest feedback. It would be very much appreciated. Yes, Maddie, the training providers to put the resources on, it's The page is in the members library of EUREPS. It's called the EUREPS Resource Library. It's launched off the dashboard for members. But if you have great resources that you feel would be good for those, you can email across to myself and we can have that conversation. Resource tool for education. I'm just reading the questions. Sorry, I forgot to say that, didn't I? Yeah, so resources are a tool for education, absolutely. So if we can direct a student to the website for the courses, it'd be a really great step forward for EUREPS community. Yeah, so absolutely, we have some podcasts on there. We have some resources, and as Espen kind of alluded to earlier, if those say, you know, if you like this, come and look at this, consider doing this course, you know, those are on there as part of the EUREPS resource library. But if it's good content, then we're more than happy to put it up. And it doesn't need to all be in English. We have members that do not speak English as a first language. I think we've got poll questions. Julian, are you ready to wrap up?
Yeah, I am. I've just noticed, and forgive me, but I've just noticed that Stella has arrived.
Okay.
Hi, Stella. Where is she? Oh, there she is. Stella, we missed you. Oh, you're on mute, Stella, I think.
Hello.
Hello. Sorry, Stella, but we've missed your input. Sorry.
I don't know. You changed the time.
We've obviously got confused. But my apologies. My apologies.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll contact you offline and we'll have a conversation. But thank you for coming. I do appreciate that.
Okay. That's
All
okay.
right. Thank you. Okay. Yes, guys. Just to conclude, then, I mean, there's some really interesting conversations and great input, Espen and Jonathan. And thank you, Charlie, for hosting that so brilliantly. And sorry for my continual interruptions, but I really can't help myself in that regard. Yeah, there's some fantastic feedback there, some fantastic feedback on the practical assessment, which I think we can make work reasonably quickly, you know, in working with our training providers. Doesn't sound like we're far off the mark. You know, the theory assessment is a bigger piece. There's no doubt about it. Thank you to Ben for introducing that. And I thought, you know, the level of detail that Ben goes into, of course, that's why we got him involved, because he's so thorough. You know, that may take a little bit longer. And, you know, I'm very conscious of not imposing something on you guys, but it's really refreshing to hear that we think that might have some real value there in providing and in maybe even providing that common certification. If you've got any thoughts on this, any of this stuff out there, you training providers or anybody else, please just send us an email. You know, if you're sitting back in your home horrified at all of this, then please let me know, because, you know, we want to get all views in this. As I've said, we have the Training Provider Coalition. The meeting's in May. I've forgotten the date, but it's in early May. You know, we'll continue these discussions there. But yes, I hope you can see, you know, that this is not I know some of the feedback we had in the Blueprint project was that yeah, all great, although this could be conceived as a little bit of sort of authoritarianism. That's a big word to get out, but that we're sort of imposing something, and it wouldn't be wanted. But you know, I hope that you don't feel that. What we're trying to do is raise the bar here, set a standard, a minimum standard. Some of you will hit that, some standard, some of you will be way above, but ultimately we have to determine a minimum standard. And having not only some guidance around the delivery model and that documentation, that heavy documentation that Espen refers to, but also very importantly, you know, the assessment side of things. And while we've given general guidance in the past, we can see that there is variable practice. So forgive us if we, you know, you know, you feel that we're imposing something. It's not the intention. We're trying to work with you guys to improve the situation for everybody, because, you know, we do need that minimum standard. Really interesting, that last bit of conversation around content, and we are working on that. It's been, I'm sure for you as well, but it's been a hell of a year, right? I don't think I've ever worked so hard, and you know, just so many things that arise, so many changing situations. But this is something that I really want to focus on. We did the EREPS webinars. They were a little bit rough and ready, but ultimately I think they were successful. So there is definitely something there. We're going to professionalize that and make it look a little bit more glossy and professional. But I'd very much ask, you know, for volunteers to be involved. You guys have got a huge amount of knowledge out there. I've, you know, worked in training providers most of my life, and some of the people that I encounter and then level of knowledge is incredible. So, you know, we want to tap into that. So please don't be afraid to approach us about getting involved in podcasts. If you have content, and I know you all do, you know, this isn't a question of us trying to nick your content. This is a question of us trying to inform our members to raise your profile as training providers, and, you know, show the quality of what you guys do. So yes, all good intentions. We need to make it work. The Training Provider Coalition has already had some sort of benefits for me, really, because if I think back to, you know, the reasoning behind this session, you know, I had feedback, you know, that we needed to look more at the assessment side. So that's why, you know, we sort of created this, and I hope you feel it's well directed. I know there's lots of issues about how we engage with health, etc., etc. And believe me, EuropeActive and us will be addressing all of those things to start talking to the health sector and what implications that has for our various roles. But it also, it was actually Espen, I think, in his feedback for the Training Provider Coalition that said, you know, please, you know, don't rush to this. Don't rush to this. Talk to us, involve us in the development process for any assessment or any other tasks that you embark on, because ultimately, you know, you need to get everybody on board with this. And to make sure you've got a fully rounded view of what you're trying to achieve. So the sort of input we've had from Jonathan and Espen, I wish we'd had the chance to talk to you as well, Stella, but we've messed up the timings there a bit, is just so invaluable. So please, all of you training providers, national associations, whoever is listening in, we just ask you to continue to involve yourself in everything we do, not just the assessment piece, but everything we do. And yet, if you can provide some content, we'd be just so delighted to put it out there to our members. So that's it. Thanks for, if you stuck with that whole thing, and we've kept the numbers up pretty well, actually. So, you know, if you're stuck with that whole thing, then that's fantastic. It's online. It's not the same as being in a room where we can all have a bit of a, you know, face-to-face and a good chat. But hopefully there's been something in there for you. Lots of stuff to do. We'll keep working on the assessments. We are working to complete the qualifications. We've talked about qualifications, the new format. You will get that slide shortly. So lots of stuff to come out. But thanks for your attention today. Thanks to all the panelists. Thanks to Anna, Ben, Espen, Jonathan, Stella. Thanks to Charlie for hosting that last session. And thanks for coming, guys. And bye-bye.